The strange thing about breaking down is that the world usually keeps moving as if nothing happened. The rain had been falling for hours. Not the gentle kind that made a city look beautiful. This was cold spring rain that soaked through jackets, slipped into shoes, and turned every block into a test of endurance. By the time I left the library that night, my umbrella was already broken. One of the metal ribs had snapped during the afternoon storm, leaving it hanging uselessly above my head. I should have taken a cab. I knew that. But cabs cost money, and money was something I counted carefully these days. Every dollar already had a destination before it reached my wallet. Rent, utilities, student loans, groceries, life. So I started walking. My name is Emma Parker, and at 24 years old, I had become very good at pretending everything was fine. Fine was easier than explaining. Fine was easier than admitting that I worked 2 jobs, slept too little, and worried constantly about bills I could barely afford. Fine was easier than saying I felt tired all the time. The city lights blurred through the rain as I crossed another intersection. Water dripped from my hair. My sneakers squished against the wet sidewalk. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and each gust of wind seemed determined to push me backward. I checked my phone. 3% battery. No new messages. That should not have bothered me, but somehow it did. The streets felt lonelier when nobody was looking for you. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. A bus splashed through a puddle nearby. Headlights reflected across the wet pavement like streaks of gold. Around me, people hurried toward warm apartments, restaurants, and late-night plans. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to be. Everyone except me. Half a mile later, my legs began to feel unusually heavy. At first I blamed exhaustion. Then I blamed the weather. Then I realized something was wrong. My vision blurred for a second before clearing again. I slowed my pace. The backpack on my shoulders suddenly felt twice as heavy. "Come on, Emma," I whispered to myself. "Just get home. One more block." Then another. The rain grew colder. My heartbeat sounded strangely loud in my ears. I reached for my phone again, but the screen had already gone black. Dead battery. Perfect. I laughed once. A tired, humorless sound. Then even that felt difficult. The world around me seemed to tilt slightly. Not enough to panic. Just enough to notice. I stopped beneath a streetlight and tried to steady myself. Cars passed. People walked by without looking. Nobody noticed the girl standing alone in the rain. Maybe I preferred it that way. I took another step. Then another. The city lights stretched and blurred. My knees weakened. Suddenly the sidewalk felt much farther away than it should have. The last thing I remember was the sound of tires slowing somewhere nearby. A dark vehicle pulling toward the curb. A distant voice giving an urgent instruction. And then everything disappeared into silence. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was warmth. Not sunlight. Not a heater. A thick blanket draped over my shoulders. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Everything felt distant and quiet, as though the world had been wrapped in cotton. Then I heard the rain. Soft now. Steady. Tapping gently against glass. My eyes focused slowly. Dark leather seats. Dim interior lights. The faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne. I sat upright too quickly and immediately regretted it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. "Easy." The voice came from across the vehicle. Calm. Deep. Controlled. I froze. A man sat opposite me in the spacious rear cabin. His dark suit looked perfectly pressed despite the weather outside. One arm rested against the seat beside him. His expression revealed almost nothing. Yet there was something about the way he watched me that felt different. Not threatening. Not intrusive. Attentive. Like someone assessing whether I was okay. Panic fluttered briefly in my chest. "Where am I?" My voice sounded weak. The man did not seem surprised by the question. "You collapsed on the sidewalk." He spoke evenly, as though stating a simple fact. "My driver and I found you a few minutes ago." Memory returned in fragments. The rain. The streetlight. The overwhelming exhaustion. Then nothing. I looked toward the tinted windows. The city moved outside in blurred streaks of color. I should go. I tried to push the blanket aside. "Thank you, but I should really go." Another wave of dizziness forced me back against the seat. The man remained calm. "You can barely sit upright." Embarrassment warmed my face. He was right. I hated that he was right. "Who are you?" I asked. A brief silence followed. "Sebastian Reed." The name meant nothing at first. Then recognition hit me. I had heard it before. Newspaper articles. Business headlines. Rumors whispered throughout the city. Some people called him a billionaire. Others called him far more complicated things. Suddenly, my pulse quickened. Sebastian Reed? A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. That is usually how introductions work. I stared at him. Nothing about the man in front of me matched the stories. He looked composed. Tired, perhaps, but not dangerous. Not cruel. Just observant. The vehicle slowed at a traffic light. Outside, rain continued falling across Manhattan. Why did you stop? I asked quietly. For me. Sebastian looked out the window for a moment before answering. Because you looked like someone who needed help. The simplicity of the response caught me off guard. No speech. No explanation. Just the truth. My eyes drifted to the blanket around my shoulders. Someone had carefully tucked it around me while I was unconscious. The realization felt strangely emotional. I could not remember the last time anyone had taken care of me without expecting something in return. Sebastian noticed me looking at the blanket. You were freezing. I lowered my gaze. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the silence between us. Then the vehicle turned onto another avenue, and Sebastian finally met my eyes again. His voice softened slightly. You are safe now. And for reasons I could not explain, those 4 words made me feel more vulnerable than the storm ever had. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The city rolled past outside the windows while rain traced silver lines across the glass. I sat clutching the blanket around my shoulders, trying to understand how I had gone from collapsing on a sidewalk to sitting inside a luxury SUV with one of the most powerful men in New York. None of it felt real. Where are we going? I finally asked. Sebastian glanced at his watch before answering. To a doctor. My stomach tightened immediately. No, the response came out faster than I intended. I am fine. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. You lost consciousness in the middle of a storm. I was tired. You collapsed. I skipped lunch. And dinner. The question caught me off guard. I looked away. The silence that followed was answer enough. Sebastian sighed quietly and looked back out the window. Not annoyed. Not judgmental. Just thoughtful. Somehow that made me even more uncomfortable. I do not need a hospital, I said. I really do not. Good. He nodded once. Because we are not going to one. I blinked. We are not. Private clinic. 5 minutes away. I stared at him. You already arranged this? While you were asleep. The realization settled over me slowly. Somewhere between the moment I collapsed and the moment I woke up, this man had organized an entire plan without ever asking for recognition. Most people would have expected gratitude. Sebastian seemed completely uninterested in it. The vehicle turned beneath a covered entrance and came to a smooth stop. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see a modern building glowing with warm light. Before I could protest again, Sebastian opened the door himself. Cool evening air drifted inside. Come on. His tone was calm. Certain. Not demanding. Somehow that made it harder to argue. 20 minutes later, I sat in a private examination room holding a paper cup of water while a doctor reviewed my results. Nothing serious, she said with a reassuring smile. Exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. Your body simply decided it had enough. Embarrassment flooded through me. There should have been something dramatic. Something medically complicated. Instead, the diagnosis was simple. I was tired. Tired in a way sleep alone could not fix. When the doctor left, I found Sebastian standing near the window, speaking quietly into his phone. He ended the call as soon as he noticed I was looking at him. Well, he asked. Apparently, my body filed a formal complaint. A faint smile appeared on his face. The first genuine smile I had seen from him all evening. It transformed his entire expression. For a moment, he looked less like a feared businessman and more like an ordinary man carrying invisible responsibilities. The doctor said I need rest. Smart doctor. I laughed softly despite myself. The sound surprised both of us. It had been a long time since laughter came naturally. Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to notice everything. A few minutes later, a nurse returned with my backpack. We found this with you, she explained. Relief immediately washed through me. My bag contained my wallet, work badge, and the few important pieces of my life I carried everywhere. As I checked the contents, Sebastian's gaze drifted briefly toward an overdue utility bill sticking out from one of the pockets. He said nothing, not a single word. Yet something told me he understood more than I wanted him to. And for the first time that night, I wondered whether collapsing in the rain had been the least surprising thing that was about to happen to me. The clinic visit should have been the end of it. A strange night. An embarrassing collapse. A story I would eventually laugh about. That was what I kept telling myself as Sebastian's driver pulled up outside my apartment building. The rain had finally stopped. Water still glistened on the sidewalks beneath the streetlights, turning the pavement into ribbons of gold and silver. I tightened my grip on my backpack and looked up at the aging brick building that I called home. Compared to the luxury vehicle waiting at the curb, it looked even smaller than usual. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything." Sebastian followed my gaze toward the building. His expression revealed nothing. "Get some rest, Emma." I nodded and reached for the door handle. "You do not have to worry about me." A faint smile touched his face. I was not planning to. The answer made me laugh softly. Somehow it was exactly the response I expected from him. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and closed the door behind me. The SUV remained parked for a few moments as I climbed the front steps. Only after I unlocked the entrance and disappeared inside did the vehicle finally pull away. I told myself not to think about it. Unfortunately, that became impossible. The next morning I woke later than usual. Sunlight filtered through my apartment window. My body felt sore, but the crushing exhaustion from the previous day had eased. For the first time in months, I had slept nearly 10 hours. I made coffee and sat at the tiny kitchen table while staring at a stack of unpaid bills. Reality returned quickly. Rent was due in 2 weeks. My student loan payment was approaching. My second job at a bookstore started that afternoon. Life had not magically improved because a wealthy stranger had rescued me from a storm. Yet something felt different. Around noon my phone rang. It was my supervisor at the library. "Emma, are you feeling better?" "Better?" I asked. "The medical leave request." I sat upright. "What medical leave request?" A pause followed. "Someone called on your behalf last night. They arranged 3 paid days off so you could recover." My heart nearly stopped. "Paid?" "Yes." I stared across the apartment. There was only one person who could have done that. "I think there has been some mistake." "No mistake," my supervisor said. "Everything has already been approved." After the call ended, I remained frozen at the table. Part of me felt grateful. Another part felt uncomfortable. Nobody had ever stepped into my life so easily before. Nobody had ever solved problems without being asked. An hour later, another surprise arrived. A grocery delivery appeared outside my apartment door. Nothing extravagant. Fresh fruit, soup, bread, tea, basic necessities. Attached was a simple note with no signature. The handwriting looked familiar. "Rest." That was all it said. One word. I sat there staring at the note for a long time. Outside, the city continued moving as always. Inside, I found myself wondering why a man who could have ignored me on a rainy sidewalk seemed determined to make sure I was okay. And for the first time since meeting Sebastian Reed, I realized I was no longer afraid of him. I was becoming curious. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when it arrives disguised as gratitude. 3 days passed before I saw Sebastian Reed again. During those 3 days, I rested more than I had in months. I ate real meals. I answered emails I had been avoiding. I even caught up on 2 chapters of a textbook that had been sitting untouched beside my bed. The groceries slowly disappeared from my kitchen counter. The note remained tucked inside a drawer. I told myself I would thank him if our paths ever crossed again. I did not expect that opportunity to arrive so quickly. On Friday afternoon, I returned to the library for my first shift since the storm. The familiar scent of books and polished wood greeted me as I stepped inside. Everything looked exactly the same, yet I felt slightly different. Lighter, more awake, as if someone had pressed a reset button I did not know existed. Around 4 o'clock, the front doors opened and a tall man entered wearing a charcoal coat. My heart immediately recognized him before my mind did. Sebastian. For a moment I thought I was imagining things. Men like him did not visit neighborhood libraries. Yet there he was, moving quietly between the shelves as though he belonged there. He spotted me almost instantly. A faint smile appeared. "You look better." I laughed softly. That seems to be everyone's favorite observation this week. Perhaps because it is true. The calm certainty in his voice made me smile despite myself. Sebastian glanced around the nearly empty building. "I did not realize libraries still existed." "That is because people like you spend too much time on private jets." His eyebrow lifted. "You assume I own a private jet? Do you not?" A brief silence followed. Then he smiled. "Fair point." The exchange felt surprisingly normal. That was what unsettled me most. There was nothing normal about this situation. Yet speaking with him felt easy, comfortable, as though we had known each other longer than a few days. Sebastian wandered through the shelves while I finished organizing returned books. Every so often I caught him reading titles or examining displays with genuine interest. Not performing, not pretending, interested. Eventually he stopped beside my desk. I have a question. Okay, why do you work so much? The directness caught me off guard. I hesitated before answering. Because bills do not pay themselves. And the second job? Same answer. He studied me quietly, not judging, just listening. Very few people actually listened anymore. Most waited for their turn to speak. Sebastian listened. The distinction mattered. Before I could say anything else, my manager approached carrying a large envelope. Emma, this arrived for you. Confused, I accepted it. There was no return address. Inside was an official letter from the university extension program where I had been taking evening classes. My eyes widened as I read. Additional academic funding had been approved. Enough to cover an entire semester. My hands trembled slightly. What is it? Sebastian asked. I looked up from the letter. Then back down again. Then back at him. A scholarship. His expression remained perfectly neutral. Too neutral. Suddenly suspicion bloomed inside me. You had something to do with this. Sebastian slipped both hands into his coat pockets. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. The answer sounded smooth, polished, completely unconvincing. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized Sebastian Reed might be helping me far more than he was willing to admit. The scholarship letter stayed folded inside my backpack for 3 days. Not because I was ungrateful, because every time I looked at it, I heard Sebastian's voice denying any involvement. The problem was that I no longer believed him. Life does not suddenly become easier by accident. Not when you have spent years watching every dollar and counting every hour. Opportunities like that did not simply appear. Yet proving it was another matter entirely. The following week moved faster than usual. My classes became more demanding. The library remained busy. For the first time in months, however, I found myself planning beyond the next paycheck. The scholarship had changed something fundamental. It gave me room to breathe, room to imagine. One Thursday evening, I left campus after a late seminar and discovered a small crowd gathered outside the business building. Students stood around a bulletin board reading a list of internship placements. Curious, I stepped closer. My name was there. Emma Parker. Midtown Development Initiative. Paid internship. Flexible schedule. Academic credit included. I stared at the announcement twice before accepting it was real. The internship was exactly the kind of opportunity students competed fiercely to obtain. My pulse quickened. A professor noticed me standing there. Congratulations, Emma. Thank you. I hesitated. Do you know how I got selected? The professor smiled. Strong grades. Strong recommendations. Recommendations? Someone clearly believes in your potential. The answer lingered in my mind the entire subway ride home. Later that night, I sat by my apartment window watching traffic move through the city below. My phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Normally, I ignored unknown callers. This time I answered. Hello. How was your seminar? My heart immediately recognized the voice. Sebastian. I looked out the window at the glowing skyline. Are you secretly monitoring my schedule? That sounds expensive. You can afford expensive. A low laugh drifted through the phone. The sound surprised me. I had never heard him laugh before. Fair point. Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Comfortable. Strange how quickly that had become normal. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me for days. Did you arrange the internship? No, the answer came immediately. Too immediately. You are lying. That is a serious accusation. You are not even pretending to sound innocent. Another pause. Then amusement entered his voice. Perhaps I suggested someone take a closer look at your application. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a full confession. Close enough. Sebastian. Emma. You cannot keep doing this. His tone softened. Doing what? Changing my life every week. For a moment he said nothing. Traffic hummed faintly through the phone connection. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a seriousness I had not heard before. I am not changing your life. Then what are you doing? Another pause. Longer this time. Opening doors. The answer settled quietly inside me. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The scholarship had not earned my grades. The internship had not completed my assignments. The opportunities were real, but the work remained mine. Still, as I sat beside the window holding the phone, one question continued echoing in my mind. Why did a man with everything seem so invested in the future of a girl he had met in the rain? The question followed me everywhere after that phone call. Through classes, through work, through crowded subway rides and quiet evenings at home. Why? Every logical explanation felt incomplete. Sebastian had resources, connections, influence. I understood that. What I did not understand was why he kept using those things to help me. 2 weeks later, the internship officially began. The office occupied 3 floors inside a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River. On my first morning, I stood in the lobby staring up at polished marble walls and wondering if security had accidentally allowed me into the wrong building. Everyone else looked confident, experienced, important. I felt like a girl carrying a borrowed future. The first few days were overwhelming. New systems, new responsibilities, new expectations. Yet something unexpected happened. I was good at it. Not perfect, not extraordinary. Good. Every completed assignment built confidence I had not realized was missing. One evening, after finishing a project presentation, I received a message from an unknown number. The address attached belonged to a small cafe overlooking the river. No name, no explanation. Somehow I already knew who had sent it. When I arrived, Sebastian was seated near the window with a cup of coffee in front of him. The sunset painted the water gold behind him. "You look less surprised than I expected," he said. "You are becoming predictable." A faint smile appeared. "That is disappointing." I sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved outside while soft music drifted through the cafe. Finally, I leaned forward. "I want an honest answer." Sebastian's expression remained calm. "That sounds dangerous." "Why me?" The question landed between us. He looked down at his coffee for several seconds before answering. "Longer than usual. Long enough for me to realize this mattered." "Because of a rainy night?" I asked. "No," he shook his head slowly. "Not because of the rain." My heartbeat quickened. "Then why?" Sebastian looked out the window toward the river. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. "Years ago, I had a younger sister." The confession surprised me. He almost never talked about himself. She worked too hard, took care of everyone else, believed asking for help was weakness. He paused. "One day she collapsed from exhaustion." My chest tightened. "Was she okay?" A sad smile touched his face. "Eventually. But watching someone you care about reach that point changes you." Silence settled over the table. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The groceries, the clinic, the scholarship, the concern hidden beneath every carefully chosen action. "When I saw you standing in the rain," he continued quietly, "you reminded me of her." I looked down at my hands. Emotion pressed unexpectedly against my chest. Not because he compared me to someone else. Because for the first time, I understood that his kindness was not driven by obligation or guilt or control. It came from remembering what it felt like to almost lose someone. Outside, the last light of sunset disappeared beyond the river. Inside, I realized that the mystery surrounding Sebastian Reed had never been about power. It had always been about compassion. And somehow, that truth made him far more difficult to forget. After that evening at the cafe, something shifted between us. Not dramatically, not all at once. The change was quieter than that. It appeared in small moments. A message asking how my internship was going. A book recommendation arriving unexpectedly at my apartment. A brief phone call after a difficult exam. None of it felt overwhelming. None of it felt controlling. It simply felt consistent. For the first time in my life, someone seemed interested in my future without trying to decide it for me. Autumn arrived gradually. The city traded summer heat for crisp mornings and golden leaves. My internship became a permanent part of my schedule. My grades improved. The constant pressure that had once followed me everywhere began to loosen its grip. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything nearly unraveled. I was rushing between classes when I received an email from the university financial office. A funding review had delayed part of my scholarship package. Until the issue was resolved, a significant balance would remain on my account. I stared at the screen while students moved around me. The old fear returned immediately. Fast. Familiar. The same fear that had followed me for years. What if all of this disappeared? What if I had been foolish enough to believe things were finally getting better? By evening, I found myself sitting alone on a bench overlooking the river. Cold wind drifted across the water. The skyline glowed against the darkening sky. I had not told anyone about the email. Not my professors. Not my friends. Yet somehow, an hour later, a familiar voice spoke from behind me. You always come here when something is bothering you. I turned. Sebastian stood a few feet away with his hands in his coat pockets. How did you know I was here? He sat beside me. Lucky guess. I narrowed my eyes. That was definitely not a lucky guess. A faint smile appeared before fading. What happened? The concern in his voice made it difficult to hide the truth. So I told him. The scholarship delay. The uncertainty. The fear that everything I had worked for might collapse. Sebastian listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked out across the river for a long moment. Emma. What? Do you remember what the doctor said the night we met? I thought back. Exhaustion. Stress. Rest. Not really. She said your body finally decided it had enough. I nodded slowly. And he turned toward me. Your life is different now, but you still carry every problem alone. The words landed harder than I expected because they were true. I looked down at my hands. I am trying. I know. His voice softened. That is why you are going to be fine. The certainty in those words felt strangely powerful. Not because he promised to solve anything. He did not. Instead, he reminded me of something I had forgotten. 6 months earlier, I would have faced this challenge as the exhausted girl walking home in the rain. Now I was someone else. Someone stronger. Someone capable. As city lights reflected across the river, I realized the greatest gift Sebastian had given me was not opportunity. It was belief. And once someone truly believes in you, it becomes very difficult to stop believing in yourself. 1 year later, rain fell over Manhattan again. Not a storm this time. Just a gentle spring rain that softened the city lights and painted the streets with reflections. I stood beneath the entrance of the university auditorium, holding my graduation program in both hands. Around me, families celebrated. Cameras flashed. Laughter echoed across the plaza. For a moment, I closed my eyes and listened to it all. A year earlier, I had been a different person. Exhausted. Overwhelmed. Surviving one day at a time. Now I stood here wearing a graduation gown, preparing to begin a career I had once believed was beyond my reach. The scholarship issue had been resolved months ago. The internship had become a full-time position offer. My apartment was still small, but it felt different now. It felt temporary, like the beginning of something instead of the end. The ceremony ended shortly after sunset. As graduates poured into the evening air, I searched the crowd. Friends, professors, classmates. Then I saw him. Sebastian stood near the back beneath a row of glowing street lamps. Dark suit, hands in his coat pockets. Calm as always. He had never liked attention. Even tonight, he seemed content to remain unnoticed. I made my way through the crowd until I reached him. You came. His expression softened slightly. I said I would. I laughed. You also said you were not changing my life. I was not. Really. I held up the diploma. This argument again. There was amusement in his voice now, the kind that appeared more often these days. We began walking slowly down the sidewalk while rain drifted through the glow of the city lights. Neither of us spoke for a while. We did not need to. Some silences feel empty. Others feel earned. Finally, I glanced toward him. Do you remember that night? Sebastian looked ahead. Which part? The rain. A faint smile appeared. I remember. So did I? The cold. The exhaustion. The feeling that the entire world was moving forward without me. Then a black SUV stopping at the curb. A blanket. A quiet voice telling me I was safe. At the time, I thought safety meant being rescued. I understood differently now. Safety was being seen, being valued, being reminded that your future mattered. We reached the river and stopped beside the railing. Water shimmered beneath the city skyline. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sebastian handed me a small envelope. What is this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a simple card. An invitation to a leadership development program connected to my new company. Another door. Another opportunity. I laughed softly and shook my head. You really cannot help yourself. Probably not. The honesty made me smile. Looking out across the river, I realized something important. The most powerful moment of my life had not been receiving a scholarship or earning a diploma. It had been discovering that I was capable of becoming the person I had always wanted to be. Sebastian had not built that future for me. He had simply refused to let me give up on it. The rain continued falling gently around us as city lights reflected across the water. And standing beside the man who had once found a stranger alone in a storm, I finally understood that sometimes a single act of kindness can change the direction of an entire life. Not because it saves you, because it reminds you that you are worth saving.